So there's a story told about a preacher who decided that he would use a visual demonstration to enhance his sermon. And so on a table in the front of the auditorium, he placed 4 jars. And as he was explaining, in the first jar, he said, I'm placing a worm into this jar filled with alcohol. Into the second jar, he placed a worm, and the jar was filled with cigarette smoke. Into the third jar, he placed a worm, and it was full of chocolate syrup. And into the last jar, he put the worm, and it was good, rich soil. At the end of his sermon, he gave an update on what was happening with the worms. And he said, the worm that went into the jar with alcohol is dead. And the worm that went into the jar with the cigarette smoke is dead. And the worm that went into the jar with the chocolate syrup is dead. And the worm that's in the good soil is doing just fine. So what lesson, he says to the congregation, what lesson do you think we can learn from this? And one little old lady in the back raised her hand quickly and said, well, obviously it looks like if you smoke and drink and eat chocolate, you won't have worms. That's one lesson. Don't think that's the lesson he was aiming for, though, right? I sincerely hope that all of us will come to the right conclusions and get the lesson that I'm trying to teach this morning. So as you know, we're in the sermon series on the book of Proverbs, and we're trying to absorb and apply God's wisdom, which is worth more than gold, into our lives. Today we're going to talk about being wise about alcohol. And the things we say about alcohol apply to other drugs as well. I'm thankful, by the grace of God, that alcohol and other drugs have not been a problem in my life. Even though I had access to alcohol very early in my life, I lived in a family that used a lot of alcohol, that many abused a lot of alcohol. It was not of any attraction to me. I've never been drunk, never smoked marijuana, never taken any drugs of any other kind. And I don't say that to brag. I don't say that to pat myself on the back. I say that because I'm very thankful. I haven't had to experience any negative things from that. But I know that those hearing this lesson this morning, here in our congregation, watching online, may have had a different experience than me. Many have struggled or are presently struggling with a problem of alcohol and other drugs. I want to share the testimony of a preacher. In some of my research I did looking at how other people have approached this sermon. I came across a sermon, or the subject, I came across a sermon by a preacher in California by the name of Timothy Peck. And as he introduced his sermon on alcohol, he shared his testimony. And it goes like this. I was 12 years old when I took my first drink. My mom and adopted father were hosting a Christmas party for several of their friends. They had an open bar, and the more the booze flowed, the less people noticed that I was helping myself to the orange juice and vodka drinks that they called screwdrivers. I don't remember exactly how many screwdrivers I drank, but I do remember spending the night throwing up in the bathroom. I also remember feeling absolutely awful the next day. In fact, I couldn't drink orange juice without feeling like I was going to throw up for months. Any normal person would have learned from that experience. But for me, that night was just the beginning. I wasn't a normal person. Within a week, I was regularly sneaking into my parents' liquor cabinet. And I didn't care what I drank, bourbon, vodka, brandy, it didn't matter. The drink was just a delivery system. What I was really interested in was the effect. Alcohol provided a numbness from the pain and confusion I was going through as a 12-year-old. Timothy continued. And it didn't stop with drinking. Soon I was experimenting with drugs as well. And by the time I was 13 years old, I was a daily drug user. I tried everything I could get my hands on: marijuana, pills, meth, angel dust, LSD. The only thing I never tried was heroin. I figured if I avoided heroin, I wasn't a drug addict. For 6 years, I drank and abused drugs on a regular basis. In fact, I can't remember one sober day from the time I was 12 until I quit when I was 18 years old. My grades went from being A's and B's to F's. My last year of junior high, I was suspended 3 times for getting into trouble. In fact, I failed all but one of my classes my last semester, but the school graduated me anyway, moving me on to high school. That summer between junior high and high school, I moved here to Upland, California. I didn't get into as much trouble here in Upland. It's not because I didn't deserve it. I continued to abuse drugs and alcohol on a daily basis as I coasted through high school in a continual mental haze. Tim concluded, it was only through my involvement with Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous when I was 18 years old that I was able to finally break free from my addiction. It's easy to imagine my drug and alcohol problem wasn't really that bad. After all, I only used drugs and drank for 6 years. And yet during those 6 years, my lifespan spun out of control. I was unable to sustain healthy relationships, and I consistently turned to drugs and alcohol to numb my pain and cope with life. I was young, but I was truly an alcoholic and a drug addict. Now, I share Tim's story for 2 reasons. First, because maybe your story is more like his story than my story. And I want you to know that you're not alone, that there are others who've struggled like maybe you are. The second reason I share it is because I wanted to share a story of victory. He got help. He likely continues to get help. And he is able to live a life that pleases God, and even he's in full-time ministry. And so we need stories of victory. But as we turn to the book of Proverbs, we'll discover that Proverbs really has a lot to say about the abuse of alcohol and the damage that it can have in a person's life. There are 3 significant texts in Proverbs that address the subject, and I want us to spend a few minutes with each of those texts today. And look at the advice that the proverb writer gives us about this. But I want us to notice, as we read these texts, the 3 warnings that jump out to us from these texts about the abuse of alcohol. So warning number 1, alcohol intoxication has serious consequences. So we start with the first of those passages, and it's the shortest of them, a single verse, but a good one, Proverbs 20 and verse 1. Wine is a mocker, and beer is a brawler, and whoever goes astray because of them is not wise. How simple and clear is that, right? Solomon wants us to understand that alcohol often causes people to behave in foolish ways, as scoffers or mockers, and as brawlers. Now the mocker or the scoffer, is a word that Proverbs uses regularly. It's the person who's not only unwise, but is anti-wisdom, right? You've been around drinkers probably, and you know how they often get belligerent when they get intoxicated, right? They know more than anybody, and they act very foolishly. That's scoffing and mocking. But then we also know what it means for someone to become a brawler. I know that for some people, alcohol calms them down and mellows them out. It has an opposite reaction on others, right? They suddenly become a brawler, someone ready to fight with anybody, right? Angry, aggressive. They lose all self-control. Now let's turn to a more extensive passage, Proverbs 23, the one that Marv read for us, and we're actually going to break it into 3 parts because it talks about each of the warnings in these 3 sections. We'll start with the first in just a minute, but this text is in a larger discussion beginning all the way back in verse 1 of Proverbs 23 about the dangers of gluttony, illicit sex, and then finally drinking. And the overall point of the passage as a whole is the need for self-control in these matters. But as we work through the passage, we'll notice these three warnings that I'm trying to highlight. So this first warning we're working on is the serious consequences of intoxication. So verses 29 and 30. Who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has conflicts? Who has complaints? Who has wounds for no reason? Who has red eyes? Those who linger over wine. Those who go looking for mixed wine or mixed drinks. In these two verses, we find 6 different consequences of intoxication, and each of them is in the form of a rhetorical question. All right? The first one is a question of despair. Who has woe? And the Hebrew word woe here is this expression of despair, this feeling of hopelessness, of impending doom. And woe is that overwhelming feeling of there's no way out. Life is crushing you, it's grinding you, and there's nothing you can do about it. The feeling of woe is often communicated in suicide notes. And there's no surprise that suicide and drinking and drug use often go hand in hand. Another consequence, the second one, is sorrow, and it's similar to the first. The Hebrew word for sorrow literally is ouch. Who has ouch? Who has pain? Well, those who drink too much, right? It causes anguish and distress. The question, who has strife, focuses on the consequences of broken relationships, right? And again, there's no coincidence that 80% of all domestic abuse in the United States is alcohol related. Who's got broken relationships? Who's got strife? It also includes the bar fights, right? Or the brawls at sporting events when guys get too much beer in them, right? It includes the hurtful words hastily spoken and the angry actions that come when someone's intoxicated. Who has strife? Those who drink too much. The question about complaints points to the problems and consequences of intoxication, right? Intoxication with alcohol causes problems in people's lives, right? Problems they wouldn't have otherwise. Problems that come from when you have a DUI. Suddenly you've got lots of complications with that, right? Or an unwanted pregnancy, or a ruined relationship, or a lost job because you came to work drunk. These are all problems you wouldn't have if you didn't get intoxicated. The needless bruises focuses on bodily injuries, and again, a consequence of intoxication. A person's coordination gets thrown off, their equilibrium, right? You've seen the drunken walk and that kind of stuff. That's why they do the sobriety test that way. You can't control your body the way you normally should be able to. And because it lessens your ability to think clearly, then you begin to do things you shouldn't be doing while you're intoxicated. Right? People get injured more when they're intoxicated. They do stupid things like, I think I'll jump off this rock. It's like, no, it's not a good idea. Well, you're not thinking clearly. Or they grab the keys and they get behind the wheel and things like that. And again, 60% of all emergency room admissions is related to alcohol. And finally, the red eyes refers to those bloodshot eyes, those dulled senses. When a person is drunk or wasted, their ability to see and hear and think clearly is dulled. These are all consequences, and they're listed here for us to understand. This is what happens when inebriation takes place in a person's life. Let's move on to warning number 2. Let's talk about the lure. The lure of alcohol is deceptive. Let's continue in Proverbs 23, verses 31 and 32. Don't gaze at wine because it is red, because it gleams in the cup and goes down smoothly. In the end, it bites like a snake and stings like a viper. So even way back there in Proverbs, you get this sense of wine and alcohol has this luring effect. It looks beautiful in the cup, right? And when you think about the advertising today, and I have this picture of this beer glass, or the beer can, and it's got perspiration running down it. It's so refreshing. Or the wine as it's being poured into the cup. This is red, beautiful looking thing, so inviting. Or the foam as it comes up, as it's coming out of the tap. It just looks so good, right? Think about the commercials. And the most interesting man in the world. He's ever thirsty, right? Man, I want to be like him. Or think about the settings. Like I have that picture of all these friends together, and they've all got their smiling faces, and they're at the ball game and the tailgate party, and they're drinking on the beach. They're always in the company of beautiful people. That's what happens when you drink, right? What the alcohol advertisers are selling is really a fantasy. It goes down smoothly, but it bites and stings like a snake. What they don't show are the victims of the alcohol accidents from the drunk drivers, right? They don't show the domestic quarrels that frequently erupt from drinking, or the spousal abuse, the children caught in the midst of all that chaos, the crimes that people frequently commit when they're under the influence. They don't show the drunk tank at the local jail. That's not funny. Or the red eyes and the swollen faces of intoxicated people, the jobs lost due to overindulgence. Think about the famous people who've struggled with drugs and alcohol. And I started looking up lists, and the lists go on and on and on. And some of them got help and pulled their lives back together, like the Betty Fords, right? But others not so. Amy Winehouse or Len Bias, or Matthew Perry, or Whitney Houston, or Elvis Presley, just to name a few. And those of you, in Baldwinsville, remember not long ago the Baldwinsville superintendent who drank too much and did some crowd surfing at the Friday night football game, and then immediately got into his car and the police were waiting for him. Intoxication is foolish and causes foolishness. But the devil's so crafty, right? He wraps it all in this attractive disguise, and he never delivers what is promised. What looks so good turns out to be so bad. What looks like such fun turns out disastrous. And what promises freedom turns into the trap. Which leads us to our last of the dangers. Warning number 3. Alcohol has addictive power. Here's the rest of Proverbs 23. Your eyes will see strange things, and you will say absurd things. You'll be like someone sleeping out at sea or lying down on the top of a ship's mast. They struck me, but I don't feel pain. They beat me, but I didn't know it. When will I wake up? I'll look for another drink. Here we notice some more of the consequences. And they're given to us in vivid detail, right? The intoxicated person, either by drugs or alcohol, will see strange things. Hallucinations go along with drug abuse and long-term alcohol abuse. And some drugs actually are designed to cause hallucinations. The second half of verse 33 is kind of interesting. The Christian Standard Version, which I have on the screen, says that you will say absurd things. The NIV says your mind will imagine confusing things. New American Standard says your mind will say perverse things. The Hebrew literally reads, and this is what's interesting, your mind will tell you opposite things. Right? And when your mind tells you opposite things, it's trying to say your thinking has become distorted. You're impaired in your judgment, and therefore you're going to say stupid stuff, but you're also going to do stupid things, right? And that explains why people who would never do certain things when they're sober end up doing them when they're intoxicated. Doing things that they think are truly wrong, like getting behind the wheel of a car, or getting into a fight, or any other thing you can imagine. Now, verse 34 describes the drunken experience of feeling tossed about like you're sleeping on the top of a mast on a boat. You can imagine, that seasickness that comes from that. I've had vertigo sometimes, and I know that that's an unpleasant experience. Some of you experience that as well, and maybe you've been in that drunken state, and you know the way things get spinning and out of control, which is one of the reasons why people often throw up, just from the spinning, let alone from the toxicity of the alcohol. But the most serious, I think, of all these things as we move through them is the last phrase. When he wakes up, what's his only thought? It's not, I'm never doing that again. It's, when can I get another drink? How can I get another drink? When can I get that next fix? I got to get it. And so it just continues the cycle that goes on and on and on. When a person begins to abuse alcohol, it takes control, and they become addicted. Now, let's make sure to make this clarification. The wise man of Proverbs isn't describing the effects of minimal drinking. That's not what he's describing here. He's describing the effects of drunkenness and intoxication and abuse. But I want us to be aware that our senses in general become impaired, and they're immediately affected by the first drink, right? That's what it does. But obviously, the more we drink, the more impaired we become. And because of the effects, we don't even know what's happening. We don't recognize it. We're unaware of it. In the end, how does a person know whether or not they're addicted to alcohol? How does a person know whether or not they're in control or the drink is in control? And the only really way to tell is to not drink. To not drink at all. Then you know I am in control. Or if I can't keep from drinking, I'm obviously not in control. Now there's one more passage that I want us to look at, spend a minute with. It's Proverbs 31. And it reads, "It is not for kings, Lemuel, it is not for kings to drink wine or for rulers to desire beer. Otherwise, he will drink and forget what is decreed and pervert justice for all the oppressed. Give beer to the one who's dying and wine to the one whose life is bitter. Let him drink so he can forget his poverty and remember his trouble no more." These are the words of the king's mother, King Lemuel's mother, teaching him these things. And after warning him about the dangers of sexual promiscuity in verses 2 and 3, she moves on to alcohol. And notice that she doesn't suggest that he just drink a little. Notice that she suggests that he doesn't drink at all, right? And why is it not for kings to drink wine or beer at all? Because they have better things to do with their time, and their drinking will hinder their thinking. Drinking hinders thinking. Kings and rulers need their wits about them if they're going to rule wisely and fairly. And then verses 6 and 7 suggest that alcohol is really a drug, and it is. And a drug that can be helpful to people who are dying or to the miserable to ease their pain. If it's not a good thing for the king to drink at all, then what about the kids of the King of Kings? Probably not a good idea for us either. Don't we have better things to be doing? Don't we have important things to be doing? Don't we need our wits about us to be able to live in a way that honors and glorifies God? 1 Peter 5:8 says, be sober-minded and be alert. Your adversary, the devil, is lurking like a lion, ready to devour, right? Intoxication makes us easy prey for the enemy. And Paul wrote, don't get drunk with wine, which leads to reckless living, but be filled with the Spirit. And I love that contrast between, don't be filled with the spirits, the hard spirits, be filled with the Holy Spirit. I hope today's study of Proverbs will help us to be wise about alcohol. I want to encourage us to make wise and godly choices, but I also want to encourage us not to judge others about their choices, while at the same time not allowing our liberty to lead other people into sin. In Romans 14, and you might read that more extensively at some point, we don't have time to go into it today, Paul has an extensive discussion where he clearly teaches both these principles. First, that Christians should not pass judgment on others when they differ over personal choices about disputed matters. So there is some freedom. But secondly, Christians should be careful not to put stumbling blocks or hazards in front of others that will cause them to sin. And Paul concludes the whole section with these words: do not tear down God's work because of food. Everything is clean, but it is wrong to make someone fall by what he eats. It's a good thing not to eat meat or drink wine or do anything that makes your brother or sister stumble. Whatever you believe about these things, keep between yourself and God. Blessed is the one who does not condemn himself by what he approves. So, I personally have made the choice for myself that it's in my best interest, and I believe in the best interest of others around me, that I don't drink at all. Not just that I don't get drunk, but that I don't drink at all. Now, why have I chosen that? Well, first of all, because a person doesn't have to be drunk to be dangerous or a hazard to himself or to others. And I want to stay away from that. I don't want to be in that kind of danger. Secondly, since drinking impairs judgment, the danger of becoming drunk increases with the use of alcohol. And it increases with every sip. And I want to avoid that danger as well. Number three, in some instances, exercising my liberty to choose to drink could lead someone else into dangerous territory, could have a negative impact on others. And so, even though I have the freedom, and as long as I don't get drunk, I'm not sinning, I don't want to lead other people in that direction. But number four, drinking alcohol isn't necessary. We all need water. We all need food, right? Those are necessary. Alcohol is not necessary. And so no one is ever negatively affected by choosing not to drink alcohol unless, and this is an important point, unless their decision becomes a judgment and condemnation of others. And this is where we have to be wary. We make this choice, and it's an important choice for us. We might share with others that they might consider that, but we don't judge when they don't. The Bible warns against drunkenness, but the Bible also warns against judgmentalism and self-righteousness. Beyond our understanding of Scripture, the things we might have been taught about alcohol, often our attitudes about alcohol are shaped by our experiences with alcohol. And so for some, any drinking of alcohol is viewed negative and dangerous because of the experiences they've had, where they've experienced a problem of controlling it in themselves, or they've seen it a problem with those around them, maybe their family or their friends, and they've been harmed by it, so they have a very negative view of it. For others, using alcohol in moderation was a part of their upbringing. It was the normal, everyday life, and nobody abused it, and it wasn't, in that sense, detrimental, much as it was in much of the biblical practice of wine drinking at the time. But even when alcohol isn't abused, there's always the looming danger that it might be abused, right? As we've seen in our study from Proverbs today. Before we end, though, I want to point out something that I think most of us are aware of. And that is that a problem with alcohol is often hereditary. And whether that heredity is environmental or whether it's biological, it often is something that comes from our family. An additional part of the story of Timothy Peck, the guy I shared at the beginning, is this. And let me share one more paragraph from him. He says, I suspect I had an inclination to drug and alcohol addiction long before I drank that first drink or abused my first drug. After all, substance abuse runs in my family. My biological father had a drug and alcohol problem. His father, my grandfather, had a drinking problem. My mom had her own battles with drug and alcohol. Some of my earliest memories, he says, as a child are being in a room watching a bunch of adults smoke pot. It wasn't a matter of if I was going to follow suit. It was simply a matter of when. And I don't know whether it was in my DNA or simply growing up in that environment, but I was an alcoholic and an addict simply waiting for my first drink and my first high. Now, I don't want us to run into this topic. We don't have time to deal with it. Is alcoholism an addiction or is it a disease? And probably the answer is yes, both of the above, right? But one thing I do know is all of us are responsible for our own personal choices. And so any one of us may have an inclination towards any different kinds of sins. Whether it be lust, or whether it be anger, or whether it be pride, or greed, or intoxication, addiction. We may have a propensity for that biologically and environmentally, but all of us are responsible for the choices that we make. And whenever someone's trying to overcome an addiction to alcohol and drugs, like we've been talking about, they will have to address the physical side of that dependence, or the emotional side, and certainly the spiritual dimension of it. And ultimately, the solution to addiction isn't a prescription, and it's not a therapy session, it's spiritual transformation. True recovery comes when we let God work in our lives and bring about change. And part of that first step is saying, I can't do this. I need God's help. Now, if you've never had a problem with alcohol or other drugs, I hope you never will. Amen? If you're presently having a problem with them, then please know that you are not alone. You're not alone in your struggle. And know you're still loved and valued even if you are deep into addiction. You are still loved and valued by God and by us. There are brothers and sisters in Christ in this church family who've struggled with addiction to drugs or alcohol and who have won the battle and are being victorious in their daily life right now. There are other brothers and sisters who are in the midst of the battle right now, still struggling with it, sometimes winning and sometimes losing. God cares, and we care, and we will lovingly come beside you and help you as you work through and become more wise about alcohol and drugs. And I hope that all of us will do just that, be wise and not be fools when it comes to alcohol and drugs.